Today we're talking Noblebright Fantasy versus Grimdark Fantasy. And many of you might be familiar with Noblebright Fantasy, but for me, it's a term that's super new. Especially since the past 10-15 years of my reading journey has been dominated by masterpieces of grim dark fantasy. George R.R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire literally took the world by storm and had people that weren't even interested in fantasy reading the genre. Joe Abercrombie's masterpieces in the world of the First Law series had us book nerds reading even more grimdark fantasy with him and just absolutely loving every moment of it. And because of this, publishers worked hard to fill that feed. They published more and more grimdark books, and it's to the point where there's a huge saturation of grimdark reads, great stories in the grimdark world that we can pick and choose from. But I don't know if you've noticed this, at least I feel like I have, but the winds seem to be changing a little bit. More and more people are looking for something else. And I mentioned this in another video. I think right now people are trying to fill that need with a cozy type fantasy or a romantasy. But I think it's just because they haven't found what the people are really looking for. I think the publishers are putting on this because they know there's something else. There's a void that needs to be filled, but they don't know what that void is. And they're going to those two because they haven't identified it. I think what they're looking for is Noblebright Fantasy. And even though I saw the term a while back, I didn't really start paying attention and delving into it until I read The Wizard Knight, which is a Gene Wolfe book that is not well known. I recently reviewed it. I highly encourage you to take a watch and listen because I think everyone should read The Wizard Knight, but it's what popped Noblebright Fantasy back in my head and made me delve into it. So what is Noblebright Fantasy? Well, I think the best summary of this subgenre of fantasy comes from a guy named Tiger Herbert, and I will post a full link to his article below. But essentially he says, in essence, grimdark fantasy is written with a bleak worldview, where might is right and all the glory goes to those who willed it. It also typically means that no one is good or honorable, that deep down inside everyone is wicked. He says that these stories rarely have good endings and that hope is non-existent. British novelist Adam Roberts even describes the genre as anti-Tolkien approach to writing fantasy. He argues that Noblebright Fantasy is written from a worldview that believes quite the opposite of grimdark fantasy. It believes that our choices and actions do matter and they can change the world for better. It is based on a belief that anyone can make a difference and that good is worth fighting for. This Gandalf quote from Lord of the Rings echoes this sentiment. Some believe it is only great power that can hold evil in check. But that is not what I have found. It is the small, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay, small acts of kindness and love. And reading this article about grimdark fantasy and Noblebright Fantasy just made it all click for me. The media we consume impacts our mindsets. It impacts our worldview and our moods. And while we all know fantasy is not real, that the stories contained here are not based off real life events, we can still relate to characters. We can relate to their struggles or their mindsets. And if we start to relate to them, sometimes we take them on as our own. It becomes easy to start viewing our own world, the real world, through a similar mindset, through a similar worldview. It's easy to relate what we're reading to real life. So in the past 10 to 15 years has been dominated by stories and themes where might is right and all glory goes to those who willed it, where no one is good or honorable and that deep down inside everyone is wicked, we start to view our own real world through these same lenses, and a lot of us lose hope. Without knowing it, we begin to develop this very bleak worldview. And we do all this while I believe knowing that this worldview is wrong and knowing that there is something else that is true and right. And I think that's where Noblebright comes in. We are searching for Noblebright Fantasy, and it's why after so many years, Tolkien is still the king, and why people still reread him after every few years, and nobody has filled that void, why he's the GOAT. I think it's the same reason we're drawn to Sanderson's Stormlight archives, or in my case, why I'm so drawn to the Wizard Knights. I will always love Grimdark Fantasy. Both A Song of Ice and Fire and The First Wall are both in my top 10 favorite series of all time, and I doubt we'll ever leave that top 10 list. But there's a reason why that every other series above those two book series are Noblebright Fantasy. And it's because I believe Tolkien's and Gene Wolfe's worldviews, their philosophies in their books, their fantasy writings are correct. I think there's truth in their books that call back to the soul of the reader, and these truths withstand the test of time, especially in a world like today's, where pathological mindsets have penetrated their tendrils into what seems to be every aspect of society, and where our world seems to be on the brink of war and annihilation. To borrow from that essay before, we need to believe that the choices and actions we take do matter, and that we can change the world for the better. We need to believe that we can make a difference, that good is worth fighting for, and we need to believe that Gandalf quote. We need to believe him when he says that it is not only great power that can keep evil in check, that it is our small everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay. And I believe Noblebright Fantasy is that. I think Noblebright Fantasy is about to explode back into the mainstream shelves, because this is not only what we're looking for, it's what we need now more than ever. Anywho, that's my rant about Noblebright Fantasy versus Grimdark Fantasy. Let me know what you think. I know most of you have probably already heard of Noblebright Fantasy, but it's a really new subgenre to me, and I was really excited to learn about it. Post your favorite Noblebright Fantasy books down below so that people who are looking for books in this genre can figure them out. And until next time, read more books. Thanks for watching.